"This isn't your house anymore." That's what my mother's new husband said, just before his fist connected with my face. The same porch where my father once taught me how to sand would now reek of beer and betrayal. My mother stood behind him, frozen, clutching the doorframe like it could hold her upright. 10 years away, and somehow, I was the stranger on my own doorstep. I didn't swing back. I just stood there, blood warm on my lip, watching him with a calmness that scared even me. Because what he didn't know was that everything behind that door, every beam, every nail, was still legally mine. I had come back to Crescent Bay, Oregon, after a decade of silence. 10 years since I left this little coastal town chasing dreams of becoming an architect. Back then, I thought distance could bury grief. I was wrong. My father, Robert Dawson, was a craftsman, a boat builder, a perfectionist, the kind of man who believed wood had memory. We'd planned to expand his workshop by the bay, but he died before we ever finished the plans. My mother, Helen, was never the same after that. She started selling off little pieces of him, his tools, his journals, even the stories. Then came David, her business partner turned husband. He said he'd modernize the workshop. I thought leaving would protect me from watching her fall apart. But as the years passed, I realized leaving didn't protect me, it only let him in. I kept paying the property taxes, wiring money from Portland, thinking that love could travel through bank accounts. But one morning, an email from my mother shattered that illusion. Subject, workshop. Message, we're selling. It's time to move on. Attached was a buyout offer, $12,000 for the entire legacy of my father's life. I read it twice. Then again. I wasn't angry, just hollow. David's fingerprints were all over it. Fast money, no discussion, no soul. So I packed a bag, caught the next bus down the coast, and told myself this was just business. But when I stood on that porch, my porch, and felt the sting of his fist, I knew this was war. Because the Dawson workshop wasn't just a property. It was proof that love built with your hands could outlast greed. And if they wanted to erase my father's name, they'd have to go through mine first. Before I take you deeper into this story, tell me, where are you listening from right now? And if you believe legacies deserve to be protected, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that hit straight to the heart. That night, I didn't just leave the porch, I left behind the last piece of silence. Because when I came back to Crescent Bay, I wasn't here to visit. I was here to reclaim. The taxi from Crescent Bay Station rattled down the old coastal road, the fog rolling in like ghosts coming home. I hadn't seen this place in 10 years, yet every turn still whispered memories I'd tried to forget. When the driver slowed at the gravel driveway, I almost told him to keep going. But there it was, the Dawson workshop. Or what used to be. The sign that once read Dawson and Son, handcrafted boats since 1984, was gone, replaced with a shiny printed banner that screamed coastal marine design. The yard was a mess, beer cans, scraps of plastic, cheap fiberglass shells stacked like tombstones where wooden boats once gleamed. The house itself leaned with exhaustion. The white paint had peeled into gray scales, the porch lights flickered, and the windows stared back empty, like eyes that had seen too much. I stepped out of the car. My boots sank slightly into damp gravel. The air smelled of salt and diesel, not cedar and varnish like it used to. I gripped my coat tighter as I climbed the steps. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from recognition. This used to be home. The door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there, looking older, smaller, like life had been slowly shrinking her. Her once bright hair was streaked with silver, and her smile trembled before it even formed. "Clara," she said softly. "You're back." Before I could answer, he appeared, David Cole. Early 40s, slick hair, expensive jacket trying too hard to look important. And the smell hit me first, beer and arrogance. "Well," he said, smirking, "look who decided to show up. The runaway daughter." I didn't flinch. "I came to talk about the workshop," I said, my tone flat. "The workshop?" he laughed, stepping forward. "You mean my business now?" He leaned in, the smirk fading into something darker. This isn't your house anymore. Then came that fist again. Sharp, fast, final. The world went still, the waves, the wind, even the light seemed to pause. My mother gasped, her hand halfway to her mouth, but she didn't move. She didn't even look at me. She looked at him. That hurt more than the hit ever could. I straightened, wiped the blood from my lip, and looked him dead in the eyes. You're right, I said softly. It's not my house. I turned toward the road, the words forming like iron in my throat. But it's not yours either. As I walked away, the cold wind burned my cheek where he'd struck me. But beneath that sting was something else, clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do next. That night, in a dim motel by the sea, I would open a folder that could destroy everything David thought he owned, and prove the workshop still belonged to the one man he could never replace. The motel room smelled faintly of salt and detergent. The single lamp beside the bed hummed like it was trying to fill the silence I couldn't bear. I sat there, ice pressed against my cheek, watching the bruise slowly bloom beneath my skin. It wasn't just pain, it was a reminder. A reminder of why I came back. I set the ice aside and pulled my laptop from my bag. The folder I opened wasn't just filled with files, it was filled with years of guilt. Tax receipts, payment records, repair invoices, all in my name. Quiet proof that I'd kept my father's dream alive from miles away. At the bottom was a manila envelope, the corners frayed with time. Inside it lay the original deed to the Dawson workshop, signed in my father's steady handwriting. My fingers traced the paper as if I could feel his pulse through the ink. And then, near the bottom of the page, I saw it, something I'd almost forgotten. The artisan clause. I'd helped him write it when I was 19. It read, "This property shall be used exclusively for handcrafted marine craft. Any attempt to mass-produce or sell prefabricated vessels shall result in immediate breach of ownership." I felt my heartbeat quicken. David had no idea this clause existed. He'd been selling imported fiberglass shells, cheap, soulless replicas under my father's name. He wasn't just a fraud, he was in violation of a legally binding contract. The tide had just turned. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't called in years, Mark Chen, my father's old attorney and family friend. My thumb hesitated for half a second before I hit call. He answered on the second ring. His voice was older, raspier, but still calm. "Clara," he said quietly. "I was wondering when you'd reach out." "They're selling the workshop," I told him. And David hit me. Silence stretched for a few seconds before he spoke again. "Do you still have the original deed?" "I do," I said. "Every page." "Then we start there," he replied. "If that clause holds up, we can freeze everything, assets, accounts, sales. He won't be able to touch a single plank until the court decides." When the call ended, I sat in the dim glow of the lamp, listening to the sound of waves crashing beyond the thin motel walls. But the ocean didn't sound peaceful anymore. It sounded like a warning, and a promise. I opened a notepad and began writing down everything David had done. The forged documents, the fake sales, the hit, my mother's silence. I wasn't writing a diary. I was building a case. By dawn, I'd made my decision. The next time I walked into that workshop, I wouldn't be the broken daughter. I'd be the storm coming for everything he stole. Morning came gray and cold, the kind that seeps into your bones before the coffee even brews. I stood outside the courthouse beside Mark Chen, my father's old friend and the only man I trusted left in Crescent Bay. His silver hair caught the wind as he adjusted the stack of folders in his hands. "Ready?" he asked. I tightened my grip on the leather notebook my father once used for his sketches. I'd been ready for 10 years. An hour later, the judge's signature hit the page, temporary injunction granted. David Cole's hands were officially tied. No sales, no transfers, no destruction of property until the case was resolved. The law had finally stepped in, but justice, that would take more than paper. We drove straight to the workshop, the sheriff's cruiser trailing behind us, tires crunching over the gravel. The sky above looked like brushed steel, heavy with rain and reckoning. The place looked worse in daylight. The once polished boats were replaced by soulless fiberglass shells. The smell of salt and wood had been drowned by resin and chemicals. David was there, of course, beer in hand, laughter echoing through the half-finished hulls. 2 workers loaded crates onto a trailer while music blared from a portable speaker. When he saw us, his grin froze. Well, well, he said, voice dripping sarcasm. The prodigal daughter and her lawyer. You sure you're in the right place? Thought you quit this family years ago. I didn't quit, I said, stepping closer. I invested. Mark's tone was cool, precise. Mr. Cole, as of this morning, the court has issued an injunction. You are required to cease all business operations immediately. David laughed, loud, mocking. You've got to be kidding me. Helen owns this place now. She signed everything over. Mark flipped open his folder. Actually, she didn't. The bank flagged 2 forged loan documents under your name. And the signature you faked for Clara? That's federal fraud. For the first time, David's smirk cracked. You think you can prove that? I stepped forward and pulled the deed from my bag, sliding it across the dusty workbench. My father's signature gleamed faintly beneath its plastic cover. You broke this clause, I said, pointing. This workshop was meant for handcrafted vessels, not your cheap, mass-produced junk. Every sale you made under my father's name is a violation. David's face twisted. You wouldn't dare take this to court. I already did, I said. For the first time, he looked scared. Really scared. But fear turns dangerous fast, and when the sheriff stepped closer, David's next move would change everything. Because cornered men don't surrender quietly. The air inside the workshop felt like it could shatter. David's eyes darted between the sheriff, Mark, and me, his chest heaving, his jaw tight. The smirk was gone now, replaced by something raw and dangerous. You think anyone's going to believe this? He spat. You left. You don't belong here. I left, I said calmly, but that doesn't make me blind. He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You're just like your father, so obsessed with wood and honor that you forgot what real business looks like. The cruiser's tires crunched over the gravel as it pulled away, carrying David into the gray distance. The workshop fell silent, except for the wind slipping through the broken window panes. My mother leaned against the doorway, trembling. The robe she wore hung loose around her shoulders, her face pale and hollow. For a moment, she looked lost, like a woman waking up from a dream she hadn't realized was a nightmare. I didn't know, she whispered. He said it was just business, that he'd make your father proud. I stared at her for a long time. Dad didn't build this place for business. He built it for meaning. Her lip quivered, and her eyes glistened. I was lonely, Clara. I know, I said quietly. But loneliness doesn't give anyone permission to burn down someone else's legacy. She covered her face with shaking hands. I let him change everything. The name, the design, the heart of it. I thought if I just stayed quiet, it would all go away. I took a step closer. You don't have to stay quiet anymore. Mark cleared his throat gently from behind us. The injunction is secure. We'll begin the audit first thing tomorrow. I nodded, but my eyes stayed on my mother. We'll fix this, I told her. She lowered her hands, eyes red. You really think it's possible to bring it back? I looked around the room, the cracked walls, the dusty beams, the wrecked benches where my father once stood whistling over his work. I don't need to fix it, I said softly. I just need to rebuild it. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. A small, fragile hope flickered there. She took a shaky breath, then nodded. Mark gathered the folders and walked toward the door. You've got a long road ahead, Clara, he said. But your father would have been proud of this. After they left, I stood alone in the workshop. Dust floated in the shafts of light coming through the window, landing gently on the scarred wood floor. Beneath the dirt, I saw faint markings, my father's initials, carved by his hand decades ago. I knelt and brushed the dust away, tracing each letter with my fingertip. For the first time in years, the ache in my chest wasn't grief, it was peace. That night, I made a promise. The Dawson workshop would live again. Not as a business, not as revenge, but as a resurrection. Days turned into weeks, and the sound of hammers replaced the echoes of anger. Every morning, I unlocked the workshop's door and breathed in the air, cold, sharp, and honest. It still smelled faintly of cedar beneath the stench of resin. That was enough to remind me why I stayed. The first few days were brutal. The place was a graveyard of neglect, gray paint smeared over oak beams, tools rusted, glass cracked. But underneath the wreckage, I could still feel my father's presence in every plank. His fingerprints, invisible yet permanent. I sanded the floors, one board at a time. The gray paint came off in curls, revealing the golden wood that had once reflected sunlight like water. I scrubbed the walls, replaced the broken windows, repaired the benches. Each creak of the old boards felt like the house sighing in relief, like it was waking up again. The original sign had been lying face down in the dirt outside. Dawson Workshop, handcrafted boats since 1984. The paint was chipped, but the letters still stood strong. I spent an entire afternoon restoring it, tracing each letter with a trembling hand until it looked almost new again. When I rehung it by the road, the sunlight caught the wood just right, and for a moment, it felt like time itself paused to watch. One afternoon, while sweeping under the main bench, my broom caught on something solid. I knelt down, pulled back a loose floorboard, and found a small oilcloth bundle wrapped with twine. My hand shook as I unwrapped it. Inside were my father's chisels, worn smooth from years of work, and his old compass, the one he used to align every keel by instinct, not measurement. Beneath it all lay a folded note, yellowed at the edges. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was his. For when you come home. Just 5 words. No explanations. No instructions. Just belief. My vision blurred as I sat there on the floor, surrounded by dust, tools, and the ghosts of everything I thought I'd lost. The ache in my chest softened, not into grief, but into something steadier. Peace. I ran my hand along the compass's metal edge. It was cold, but familiar. Like shaking hands with the past and the future all at once. That night, I locked up the workshop and looked back at the flickering porch light. For the first time, it didn't feel haunted. It felt alive. But the story wasn't over yet. There was one final piece left, to reclaim not just a building, but a name. The name my father gave everything for, and the name I was finally ready to carry forward. The day I finished rebuilding the workshop, the air smelled of salt and sawdust, exactly how it used to when my father was alive. The morning sun poured through the windows, lighting up the freshly sanded beams like veins of gold. For the first time in a decade, the Dawson workshop stood proud again. No cheap banners. No noise. Just wood, tools, and silence, the kind of silence that speaks of peace, not pain. I climbed a ladder and rehung the original sign out front. Dawson Workshop, handcrafted boats since 1984. The wood creaked softly under my hand, like it was sighing back into place. My mother stood behind me, wrapped in a wool coat, watching quietly. Weeks had passed since David's arrest. The trial had come and gone. He'd pleaded guilty to fraud and forgery, 7 years in state prison. When the judge read the verdict, my mother sat in the back of the courtroom, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. She didn't look at me right away, but when she finally did, she whispered, "I'm sorry." And for the first time in years, I believed her. After that, she started showing up at the workshop again. Not to help, at least not at first, but to sit and listen. Sometimes she'd hum old songs my father used to whistle. Sometimes she'd just watch the dust dance in the sunlight, smiling through tears. One afternoon, I found her polishing my father's compass, the same one I'd uncovered from beneath the floor. He'd be proud of you, she said quietly. I smiled. He'd be proud of both of us. The road to forgiveness wasn't clean or easy. Some days, the silence between us felt heavier than the wood we worked with. But little by little, the distance shrank. Grief had divided us, but rebuilding had sown something new in its place, understanding. When the last plank was nailed, I stepped back and looked around. Everything my father had dreamed of was here again, the smell of varnish, the hum of tools, the heartbeat of creation. The workshop wasn't just restored. It was reborn. I walked to the workbench, picked up the compass, and set it in the center of the table. The same tool my father had used to chart every boat's symmetry now stood as a reminder that no legacy is ever truly lost, only waiting to be reclaimed. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and slow, catching the light like silver dust. I leaned against the doorway, the same one where David had struck me, and exhaled. This time, the air felt clean. I wasn't the runaway daughter anymore. I was the builder. The protector. The keeper of what was meant to endure. Because the truth is simple, some legacies aren't inherited. They're rebuilt, nail by nail, with the strength you didn't know you had. And if you've ever had to rebuild something someone tried to take from you, your peace, your home, your name, just remember, you're stronger than what broke you.